Well, hey, everybody. I just wanted to take a moment and go through what is basically a cleaning do file. So now the data that you've been given in the course is for the most part clean, except for the iPads, but there's a specific do file there that you can run. And so I want to walk through how you use a do file, in particular, how to clean data, because I think this is a skill that will be incredibly helpful to you, both in terms of this class, but if you're ever given a data set and you want to use Stata to analyze it, these are the basic tools that you can use to learn how to clean and to analyze that data. So let's go ahead and let's get started. And I'm going to, make this a little bit bigger, and so that hopefully you can see it a little bit better. But I want to walk through just a few steps. So when you're building your do file, there's a few things you want to do right off the bat that just help you to make sure that you're focused on the data that you want to focus on. Because one thing to remember is that Stata, when you open it and you use a data set, it keeps that data and it keeps the information that you've used. And so you want to start with clear all and capture log closed. So clear all, it just gets rid of all of the data that you've used before and kind of starts data fresh. Capture log close, a log file is a file that you're running to keep track of the steps that you take in the work that you're doing, okay? And so capture log close closes any log files that may be open so that you're not keeping those steps on another log file. You're keeping it on the one that you want. Now, for me, I often work on multiple computers, or maybe I'm working on a team. And so what I do in that situation is I create what I call basically a file preface. And so this creates a global that says, hey, anytime I see the word preface, I insert these words into that. And so this is the file, kind of text, the way that I get to the files that I need. And for those of you who may not be familiar with this, the way that you do that is you go to the file that you want and you right click on it and you say, all right, I want to copy the path, or I need to, anyway, I'll go to the properties. There's a couple of ways there. And then you can kind of copy and paste this in there as well. This is your location. So this right here is where I got that information, is in that location space, okay? Another way to do it is you can right click on it here and do copy address as text. Anyway, that is how you get to this kind of place where your files are. So you want to run this so that you know exactly where your files are, and you can do this if you're working on a team. I might do like John's preface. And so this would be like John preface, and then maybe you've got Jeff's preface and Janet's preface. But this way, you've always got that direction of where do I go to get my files, right? Now, the reason I like preface and then I just kind of put a star here if I'm going to use somebody else's, because this makes it so this is no longer the code, and then I put a new preface if I need it, is that way I don't have to change anything else in the do file, because you'll notice that in this preface space, you're going to be able to find all this information of where this goes. And so again, the preface just helps you to know how to call information and call data. Um, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of show you a few other things. And so here, this is where we would put preface. And then here's where we would put preface. And then let's say that I want to kind of test this. And so I'll put here just so that the code doesn't go past that. And then I hit Control D. And Control D just says, all right, this is the code that was completed as I went through. You'll see preface, perfect. And so it's pulled the data that I wanted to pull, right? So, okay, this is working. This is great. And so my log file, like I mentioned before, is just keeping track of the steps that I take. And so in the folder where I'm keeping all of this information, if I click on it, I see my log file right here, and it was just started. Just to kind of show you what it looks like. Once I started the log file, it keeps track of the information. So you'll see the command that happened was command here, and then it ended the do file. And so again, just a way for me to keep track and put it into a text file of the decisions I've made. So some other things as you're going through cleaning the data, there's a few things that you want to do right off the bat. If you have a survey that you've sent out, the first thing you're going to want to do is look at kind of, especially if this is Qualtrics or something like that, you can look at the progress on the survey and you can determine how many missing cases there are. So tab progress. And so we'll go ahead and do this so that you can see it as we go through. So if I do tab progress, I'll see that I don't have any missing cases, but I do have a lot of people who didn't complete the survey. As a matter of fact, I've got almost 390 people that didn't complete the survey. And the majority of those are well under 50%. So chances are that's data that's just not going to be super helpful for me, right? Now, I need to keep track of it because I need to report how many incomplete surveys I had for any publications that I do. And so that's why this is so important to do in a state do file is it can help me keep track of what happens. So I'm going to drop if progress, this is the variable progress. See, so progress right here is less than, so not equal to is how I'm doing this. So this is not equal to 100. I know exclamation point to not equal doesn't make a lot of sense, but that is what it is. So I do that, Control D, and I see that I've dropped 398 observations. Now I want to relabel that progress variable to be complete. So I'm renaming the variable progress to complete. So now in my data set, progress no longer exists. It's the label, but it's the name is complete. Okay. And I'm doing that just so I remember this is how I'm keeping track of how many completes I have. And then I'm changing the variable label to completed the survey. So now respondent completed the survey, just how I wanted it to go. Whenever I'm like adding names and things like that, I have to put it in quotations so that Stata knows these are words, not variables that we're using. The next thing I want to do when I'm cleaning data is look at all the variables that maybe I don't need. Variables that are, kind of information that's just not going to be helpful for me and what I'm doing. So there's a bunch of those in this data set. So there's this kind of finished variable. There's the recorded date. I don't really care about that. External reference is actually missing in this data. Location, latitude, and longitude, distribution channel. All of these variables are variables that I just really don't need. So I'm just going to drop those variables to kind of help clean my data. The reason that I do this early on, and again, another reason a do file is so helpful, is it really pushes us to think more about kind of what variables we need and helps us to clean this. And I can just go back through and I can look at these variables and I can, kind of add additional variables in this dropped space if I so desire. And so for me, that's one of the reasons that I find this to be so helpful. Is I think that these are really kind of good ways for us to keep track of the things that we're getting rid of. So the next thing I want to do is maybe I'm interested in their time to complete. I'm like, I want to know how long it took them because that'll help me. So here's some other things I can do. I can rename that duration variable to time to complete. So again, that it makes sense to me. I don't want any variable names that don't make sense. That's just, kind of silly. And so I click that. Now I've changed that variable time to complete to a label and a name that I can use. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is something that's a little bit more complicated. So I need to know what institution these respondents are from, but I also need to make sure I don't have any identifiable data in my analysis. Now, I didn't get them to report what institution they were from, but they did give me their email address. And so what I can do with that email address is I actually can do what's called a split. And so in this case, I'm going to do, okay, what is their email address? I'm just going to have a look and see. Yep, I can see that their names and their things are there. So that's great. But I'll come back to that in a little bit. But I also have a few other things that I need to see. So in this code, what I'm doing is this variable, this rename, this Q21 is their rank. So this is assistant, associate, professor, right? That's their rank. And so I've renamed it, and then I've given it an encode where I've basically created a new variable where let me back up just a minute. So encode, what that code does is that actually allows me to take something that's called a string, which is basically meaning that it's a word, and I'm going to make it a number. So for example, if a variable comes in and it doesn't have a numeric value, it is going to be listed. And let me just do this to kind of show you. Let's do this. All right. So let me show you in the data. This command describe, DESC or describe, just lets me know what the data is available. And so complete is now a byte, which means it's a numeric variable. Time to complete is long, and then recipient email is string, str, which means that these are words, these aren't numbers. And so if I ever see a variable that's words and it should be numbers, because if I'm going to do anything with it in a regression, if I'm going to, try to do some descriptive statistics, I've got to have it as a numeric variable. I can use this encode command and it will take anything that is string and it will give it a numeric value. Now, it doesn't give it a logical numeric value, okay? So don't expect that. But you'll see this is the variable that I created. It will give it, and let me do this. Tab rank, no label. Oh, all right. But it will give it a numeric variable. So I just put no label because the label here is associate professor and full professor. So that's all my respondents are either associate professors or full professors. And I want to see that, okay, so associate professors are ones, full professors are twos. So now when I run a regression, it's going to know that these are different and it will give it that one or that two, and it can be helpful as we're doing that. So the next thing I'm interested in is kind of this rank text, right? Because some people put this, didn't put associate professor or full professor, and it looks like, and maybe I haven't done that variable just yet, but that one right there just kind of lets me know that they filled something else in, and then I can go through and I can clean that up if I want to. And so what I see here is that, and I've already done this, that's why it's not pulling up. What I see here is that there were 142 assistant professors, and as a matter of fact, we'll just do this so that you can see it. So here you'll see I dropped 142 that were assistants, emeritus, or adjuncts. So this was after going through and seeing their rank text and and analyzing that. This helped me to know what I needed to drop because my focus here was on tenured professors, right? So associate or full. Now, the next variable that I was trying to figure out was this Q22.1. And for those of you who may be sitting there, hopefully thinking, how does he know what Q22.1 is? The other thing I had to do is I had to pull up the survey that I used to figure out which variable was which, right? And I was able to kind of determine which variable was which by looking at the survey, the actual survey, and walking through the questions and saying, okay, so if my respondents were race, that became Q22. This became Q22.1 because it was next. And I also had the wording that was used. And so again, for a lot of these, you have to use this to kind of decipher it as you're cleaning it. And it takes time. It takes a lot of work. So don't think that cleaning data is going to be super fast and super easy, but hopefully you're going to have the tools to do it after this. So the other thing is, as I kept going through, I kept renaming variables. One of the things I also did is sometimes I created variables that were basically variables that were not categorized. Maybe it was a numeric variable, but I wanted to kind of create categories. Another thing I can do is what is called a collapse command. So I'm going to generate a variable called years of profession, years in the profession. That's what this variable is. So years in the profession. And I do, generate this variable and make all responses period, which means that they're all missing. So this means whenever I tab this variable to see what the responses are, it's going to show no results. The reason I do that is because I want to make sure that I am properly creating the variable. And so here you'll see that I replace one if in range for the years in the profession variable, not my new variable, the old variable, is between 0 and 10. Is it between 11 and 20, 21 and 30? And so you'll see a 1 is this, a 2 is that, a 3 is that, a 4 is this, right? So I've now created this variable, and then I'm going to define a label. So for years, at years 10, I've got 1 equals 10 years or less, 2 equals 11 years to 20 years, 21 to 30, 41 to 40, or more, right? And then I'm going to label that variable, the values of the variable years professional college, years underscore 10. And so to show you what this looks like, got years in the profession. This is the one that was long, right? So I have every value in this. But the variable that I just created, new variables are always going to go at the end. I've got this one at the end. And there we go. I've now got it into categories of 10 years or less, 11 to 20, 21 to 30. Now, just to make sure I didn't miss anybody, I do this and then I do comma missing, and I've got 42 people that are missing, right? Meaning that these are people that I've got to now figure out why don't I have their years? And chances are they either A, didn't answer this question, or B, there's something wrong with my code, right? That I haven't captured them and what they put in. And so that's another thing. I want to figure out what's going on with those 42 people. And if they are just missing, that's okay. There's people that didn't answer this question. That's okay. But chances are I need to figure out where those 42 people are going to go. So that's another way that we can kind of clean it. You'll notice I'm doing that with years in my current rank. You'll notice that I'm doing that with years at my institution. I'm doing the same process. Then you're going to see that I've done it for this year, this degree status. So this is degree underscore string. So this lets me know that this variable Q23 is a string variable and it's their degree. Then I'm going to encode the variable and I'm generating the variable high degree to let me know the highest degree they've received, right? And so high degree now, I'm saying 1 and 3. So 1 or 3 is equal to 1 and 2 is equal to 2. And then my high degree becomes bachelor's or master's or doctoral professional degree. And so this is, you got to go through and you do this with every variable, okay? One thing I do want to kind of just draw your attention to is variables that are going to be dichotomous. And dichotomous means that it's either one or two, or zero or one, or it's one or the other, right? I want to make sure I use a value label that helps me to know what that variable is telling me. So in this case, I'm calling this variable, it's not sex, I'm going to call it female. And I'm going to make females are going to be ones, okay? Females are going to be ones because then in my regression, that's what I know it's going towards. It's going to say if someone is a female, because the variable is female, their probability of this outcome is X, right? It just helps me in interpretation of the information. With race, we had a lot of different categories. We were able to kind of bring that down and do that. We also made a faculty of color category because we had majoritively white faculty in this study, and we just wanted to be able to kind of look at that. And so you'll see 2 through 6 equals 1 and 1 equals 0. So white 0, and then faculty of color was the variable name. We also went through and we had their field of study. We did this later on. In this case, we didn't do a lot with it. We were just kind of interested in this idea, field of study. We had to do this part as well afterwards, where we had to go find the institution and label their institutions with the information that we needed. And then we just renamed these variables to know these were all already quantitative variables in terms of time spent in these specific outcomes. And so we just labeled those. And then time spent in service, research, and teaching. We created these variables and we added up different times and percentages, right? So service was all of these things, writing were these things, prepping my classes were these things. And so again, just kind of showing you how we've created this. This do file is available to you. You'll notice we also created some factors. You don't have to do this at this point. We're going to talk about it later in the class. But that factor was another thing that kind of helped us to clean the data and get it to where we want it to be. And so that's what most of these are here at the end. I do want to take a moment just to kind of walk through one of these. This is what's called a loop, okay? And this is if I have a lot of variables that need the same thing done to them, then I can do a loop and I don't have to do it for every single variable. So in this case, I'm doing for each variable, var, of the variable list, and then I list my variables. So this is, department communication, department advocacy, department chair vision, department chair energy. This was a Likert scale set of questions, right? And so I needed to do something with that, and they were all Likert scale. And so all these questions needed the same thing done. So after I list them, I put this little, parenthesis here, and I do recode the variable, and this tells me the variable in the variable list. 1 equals 3, 2 equals 4, 3 equals 2. This is just making sure that all those variables are coded the same way using that Likert scale. And then I'm going to generate a new variable that's going to have the variable name here, and I'm going to add another C to make sure that I know what is happening with that. And so that kind of changes the variable. And then I'm label value variable C is low. And so again, this is just another way to help me clean the data. You'll notice I use a few of these loops. They're helpful. I also did it for these variables. where I was trying to understand the verbiage and what it meant, and so I was giving it a label and I was giving it a numeric value. These are, me again, kind of going through and just cleaning these variables. So you can walk through this code, but hopefully that gives you a good starting place to be able to think a little bit about this. The last thing I wanted to show you is that for some specific individuals, I had to go through and I had to actually change something for them based on something they had written in their survey. So this was where I would use kind of that text where they'd written something specific, but their answer didn't align with what they'd said in something else, and I would make small changes to that specific idea. And so I could do that as well. So you'll notice I'm replacing promotion status equals 1 if random ID equals 471. So random ID is the randomized ID for each individual faculty member. That is what I have to do in place of using like their real name, because these are not ways that I can identify someone, at least in terms of who they really are, but I can use it when I'm going through the data. Now, I know that that was a lot in a short amount of time, but my hope is that that kind of just opened your eyes a little bit to how to clean data. There's some other tools and some other videos that are available to you in the course, in the platform, but this hopefully gets you started and you can see how I cleaned this specific data. This is the same data that you can use in your project. But if you have your own project, you can create your own, kind of data cleaning do file and use this as a template. And I do that all the time. When I'm starting a new data project, I use an old template to do it. So anyway, hope that helps. Thanks, everybody.